Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a place that is just absolutely fascinating, Kyrgyzstan. But we aren't just looking at it as a spot on a map. Instead, we're going to explore how this nation serves as a true crucible of ancient history and modern resilience. This is a place where literally every mountain pass and every political shift tells a profound story of survival and adaptation. Okay, let's jump right in.
So think about this for a second. What actually happens when an ancient nomadic culture just collides headfirst with modern revolution? This is the central tension we are going to unpack today, and honestly, it's a tension that has defined the Kyrgyz people for centuries. If you keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer, you'll see how every historical era, every demographic shift, and every cultural milestone we cover is a direct response to this ongoing clash between deep-rooted tradition and rapid, sometimes violent modernization.
All right, Section 1, the land of mountains. Extreme geography. Because, to really understand these people, we first have to understand the environment that forged them.
Get this, 91%. That is a staggering figure. 91% of Kyrgyzstan's territory sits above 1,500 meters in elevation. We are talking about the massive Tian Shan Mountains, which beautifully translates to the Mountains of Heaven. Almost a third of the country is above 3,000 meters. The landscape is just completely dominated by extreme altitudes, breathtaking alpine lakes like Isikul, and vast grasslands. So, the absolute crucial takeaway here is that this incredibly harsh, vertical environment essentially dictated a nomadic lifestyle for centuries. You couldn't just settle down anywhere. You had to move with the seasons and the herds to survive.
And human history here unfolded directly across those peaks and valleys. It's like a giant historical puzzle. Tracing it way back, we find a human presence all the way in the lower Paleolithic period, with early hominid tools showing up in the Chui Valley. By the 6th and 5th centuries BC, you start seeing the first ancient farming settlements take root. But the real game changer? That hits in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. Nomadic tribes began moving south, and the region suddenly became the bustling, beating heart of the Great Silk Road. The Kyrgyz tribes weren't just isolated mountain dwellers, they were positioned right at the crossroads of Eurasia, facilitating this massive transfer of goods, cultures, and ideas between China and the Mediterranean.
Moving into Section 2, empires and colonization, outside forces. Because, being at the center of the world's trade routes is absolutely going to bring some unwanted attention, and outside forces eventually began trying to control this mountainous crossroads.
For literally centuries, the Kyrgyz people maintained their ancient nomadic lifestyle as cattle breeders, moving freely across the vast steppes. But in the 19th century, falling under Russian imperial rule brought a really brutal shift. The Russian Empire implemented policies of mass deportation, especially up in the northern territories, and forced sedentarization. Basically, they forced these nomadic herders to just stop moving and settle in one place. And despite fierce rebellions and resistance from the Kyrgyz, the sheer military force and weaponry of the colonizers fundamentally disrupted a way of life that had existed for millennia.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Soviet transformation, 20th century shift. That imperial disruption we just talked about, it really just paved the way for an even more radical rewiring of the nation's demographics and economy in the modern era.
When World War II broke out, the Soviet Union had to adjust rapidly just to survive. Necessity forced these massive changes far away from the Western front lines, right into the heart of Kyrgyzstan. To feed the war machine and make up for lost agricultural land, there was a huge, sudden expansion of cotton, sugar beet, tobacco, and wool production. But it wasn't just farming. The Soviets literally picked up entire factories from the Western territories and relocated them into Central Asia to protect them from being bombed. And of course, with those factories came the people.
The sheer scale of this demographic shock is honestly hard to overstate. Because of the war, 110,000 refugees flooded into Kyrgyzstan. To put that into perspective, this influx brought a staggering 40% increase in the republic's population almost overnight. Just think about the immense strain on resources, the sudden mingling of completely different cultures and languages, and the aggressive push by Moscow to assimilate these groups. The country became a net receiver of population, and it permanently transformed their societal fabric.
All right, Section 4, Independence and Revolution, Post-Soviet Upheaval. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapses and Kyrgyzstan is suddenly thrust into independence, completely losing its Soviet safety net and plunging into decades of intense political upheaval.
This sudden independence triggered what was basically a chaotic chain reaction of revolutions.
First, in 2005, the nation experienced the Tulip Revolution. Widespread allegations of corruption, nepotism, and a really struggling economy led to the fall of the first post-Soviet president, Oscar Akayev. Second, Kerman Bekbakiev took power, promising all these reforms, but within months, power concentrated right back into the hands of Bakiev's relatives and utility prices skyrocketed. Which leads directly to the third step. In April 2010, massive unrest erupted all over again. Protests over economic hardship turned violent, resulting in the total collapse of the Bakiev regime. We're looking at a young nation locked in a continuous cycle of instability, trying to build a functioning democracy from the ground up while dealing with deep economic stagnation.
So, amidst all this domestic turmoil, you have to ask, how does a small, landlocked nation actually survive? The answer is multi-vector diplomacy. For anyone watching global politics today, this is a literal masterclass in survival. It's about balancing cooperation with Russia, Europe, the USA, and China, all at the exact same time. For example, back in the 2000s, the US operated a military base in the country, while Russia simultaneously maintained heavy political and economic influence. It is a high wire balancing act of foreign policy, trying to attract investment and guarantee security without becoming entirely dependent on any single global superpower.
Section 5. Forging a National Identity. Modern Kyrgyzstan. Having survived imperial rule, a complete Soviet transformation, and multiple modern revolutions, who actually are the Kyrgyz people today?
Today, Kyrgyzstan is the most ethnically diverse of the Central Asian countries. Roughly 70% of the population is Kyrgyz, 15% is Uzbek, and 10% is Russian. And this diversity is a direct result of that incredibly complex history we just walked through, especially the Soviet era. Back in 1924, Soviet border shifting placed different ethnicities in really close physical proximity, putting Russian settlers in the fertile northern lands while the pastoral Kyrgyz largely remained in the mountainous south. This has created a vibrant, rich, multi-ethnic society, but also one that definitely has to work hard to navigate occasional socioeconomic and demographic tensions.
While modern nation building is super complex, some cultural pillars here just run incredibly deep. Take the historical figure of John Batyr, for instance. Long before the Soviet era even started, Kyrgyz women weren't just confined to domestic tasks. They occupied high political and economic positions. Tradition actually makes a ton of room for female heroism and agency. During historic invasions of the region, women like John Batyr took decisive action to lead and protect their families and communities. It really highlights the exceptionally strong and deeply respected role of women in Kyrgyz society.
But forging a modern identity isn't just about culture. It also means dealing with massive physical threats to the environment. On one side, they are dealing with a toxic inherited Soviet legacy. We're talking abandoned technical plants and a staggering 400,000 tons of uranium tailings left behind, which release dangerous radiation into the soil and water of places like the Fergana Valley. Then, on the other side, you have modern exploitation issues, unregulated gravel extraction and excessive deforestation, as struggling businesses try to minimize costs at the direct expense of nature. It's a serious dual threat that the country is actively scrambling to regulate today.
Which leads us to Section 6, a modern crossroads, looking forward. As we bring this explainer to its final theme, we're going to see how a vibrant culture and an incredibly young population are navigating these exact challenges to forge their future.
One of the most powerful ways they're doing this is through a real cultural renaissance. The introduction of democratic systems opened the doors for a thriving post-Soviet visual arts movement, reclaiming meaning after decades of Soviet influence. Sports have also become a massive uniting force. And it's not just about winning medals, it's about building social cohesion and national consciousness on a grand scale. And in cinema, filmmakers are gaining international recognition by exploring exactly that tension we talked about at the start, the profound friction between their ancient nomadic legacy and the homogenizing pressures of globalization.
And who is driving this new culture? A remarkably young demographic. Nearly 30% of the population is between 14 and 29 years old. Kyrgyzstan is a remarkably young nation. This is a burgeoning, hyper-connected, tech-savvy generation. They have incredible mobile accessibility and online services, but they also face really severe challenges like youth unemployment and migration. Ultimately, they are the ones tasked with taking this raw, historical crucible and turning it into a stable, modern state.
Which brings us right back to our core tension. How will this new generation navigate the legacy of their ancient Silk Road traditions against the pressures of a rapidly modernizing world? They have the extreme terrain, the deep nomadic roots, the scars of empires, and the undeniable energy of a vibrant cultural renaissance. It's a tremendous balancing act, and honestly, watching how Kyrgyzstan evolves in the 21st century is going to be absolutely captivating.
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.